It is your right to know the origins of the IDF. The IDF was not born in a vacuum, but it did appear almost instantaneously, a national army created virtually overnight to defend a state that had literally just been created. Israel came into being on the 14th of May, 1948. The IDF sprang up on the 26th. A full army only in 12 days. How did this happen? It was the direct successor to a range of violent Zionist paramilitary groups operated in British-mandated Palestine. What was known as Palestine suddenly started to be called Israel instead, and there are three key groups here: the Haganah, the Irgun, and the Lehi, or the Stern Gang as they became nicknamed. These organizations were not just militias, they were terror groups. Not only terror groups by today's definitions, but this is how they were referred to in the Western media then. They were responsible for massacres, bombings, and assassinations. The Haganah was formed in 1920, initially styled itself as a defensive militia tasked with protecting Jewish settlements in Palestine. However, by the 1930s and 1940s, it had grown into a large, well-organized military force with tens of thousands of fighters. It carried out numerous offensives against Palestinian villages and Arab resistance groups, especially during the Great Arab Revolt of 1936–39, during which it worked closely with British forces. In 1947–48, the run-up to the creation of Israel, the Haganah was central to Plan Dalet, a military campaign aimed at securing territory for the Jewish state through expulsion and intimidation of the Arab population. You might think that sort of things started with the Nakba as a singular event. Plan Dalet and other campaigns led to the depopulation of hundreds of Palestinian villages and the mass displacement that was very much part of what we now collectively refer to as the Nakba. It all happened before the State of Israel functionally came into existence too. The Haganah also included an elite strike force, the Palmach, which pioneered tactics that remain in IDF doctrine today, including night raids and demolitions and psychological warfare. Politically, they were very much closely aligned with the labor Zionist movement, which happened to be led by someone by the name David Ben-Gurion, who of course ended up becoming Israel's first prime minister. Not proud history for the founder of Israel, if you ask me. In fact, a number of prime ministers of Israel have links to these three groups. Amazingly enough, this group became the core of the IDF, though it was the largest of the three paramilitaries, and if you think they sound extreme enough in and of themselves, wait to find out that this group was far and away the most lenient. The next group is Irgun, who split from the Haganah in 1931 due to ideological differences. While the Haganah maintained at least publicly a defensive image, the Irgun championed direct aggressive assaults guided by revisionist Zionism, the belief that Jewish identity should be promoted through expansionism, and the need for a Jewish majority. Again, does not this remind us with how Israel conducts itself these days? The Irgun adopted terrorism as a political strategy. Its most infamous act was the 1946 bombing of the King David Hotel, which of course we've all heard of. Haven't we? Targeting the British administrative headquarters in Jerusalem and killing 91 people, including civilians. Yes, the Irgun hated Britain, but it also carried out attacks on Palestinian civilians as well, including in the Deir Yassin massacre in 1948, where over 100 villagers, including women and children, were murdered. The Irgun's legacy lives on in the IDF's ethos of overwhelming force and its readiness to target civilian infrastructure and populations under the guise of military necessity. We see the parallels between then and now, don't we? Irgun's commander was a chap called Menahem Begin, who of course later became Prime Minister of Israel, normalizing the integration of such violent ideologies into Israeli governance, one can argue. The third group, the Lehi or the Stern Gang, was the smallest of these three paramilitary groups, but the very worst of them. Founded in 1940 by Abraham Stern, hence why they're called the Stern Gang. Lehi openly promoted fascism and viewed the British as the primary enemy even during World War II. They actively sought alliances with the Axis powers, including Nazi Germany, in exchange for promises to support Jewish statehood. Lehi conducted assassinations, bombings, and kidnappings targeting British officials, Arab civilians, and even moderate Jews who opposed their methods. Stern actually wrote to Hitler at one point expressing his admiration. The Irgun were forcibly integrated into the IDF in 1948 during what was called the Altalena affair. The Altalena was an Irgun arms ship carrying weapons necessary for the current war. Prime Minister Ben-Gurion sent his new IDF against the Irgun, notably ordering the shelling of the Altalena ship. After this confrontation, the Irgun was assimilated into the IDF as well. In 1944, they assassinated Lord Moyne, the then British Minister of State for the Middle East in Cairo. And a second important assassination happened in 1948 when they assassinated Count Folke Bernadotte, the UN mediator trying to broker a ceasefire for proposing the right of return for Palestinian refugees. Lehi's fusion of ideological extremism, racial supremacism, and political violence echoes in the IDF's treatments of Palestinians today, especially in targeted killings, extrajudicial executions, and the systemic dehumanization of Gaza's population, and so much of this can arguably be said to have gone beyond just the IDF. So much of this ethos and thinking permeates Israeli society as well. Stern was shot dead in 1942, but Lehi persisted for several more years, another member of whom, as you might not be surprised to hear by this point, also became a prime minister of Israel later, Yitzhak Shamir. But Lehi was finally disbanded in 1948 when members of the group were then permitted to join the IDF because they're exactly the sort of people that were welcome when Israel declared independence. All three paramilitaries were either absorbed into or merged with the newly formed IDF. The Haganah formed its backbone, the Irgun and Lehi were pressured into disbanding and their fighters absorbed into formal military units, but their influence did not disappear. It became institutionalized. These three groups were the IDF, therefore their doctrines of asymmetrical warfare, ethnic cleansing disguised as security operations, and psychological terror campaigns all made their way into IDF strategy.